I always knew I was invisible in my own family, but I never thought my sister would try to make me disappear for good. It was my 36th birthday. The candles flickered. Everyone sang. And just as I leaned forward to make a wish, Lindsay grabbed the cake with both hands and slammed it into my face with a force that snapped my head backward. I heard the crack before I felt it, my skull hitting the edge of the table behind me, then warmth spreading through my hair, blood mixing with vanilla frosting, the room spinning. Through blurred vision, I saw my sister's face above me, and for 1 second before she rearranged her expression into fake concern, I saw something that made my stomach turn cold. She was smiling. "It was just a joke," my mother said. "Stop being so dramatic." But the next morning, when the ER doctor studied my x-ray, his face went pale. He didn't say a word to me. He just picked up the phone and called the police. What he saw on that scan would expose a truth my family had buried for 30 years. Have you ever discovered that the people who should protect you were the ones hurting you all along? My name is Kelly Hughes. I'm 36 years old, a financial analyst who spent a decade building a career and saving every penny to buy my own home without help from anyone. I thought independence meant freedom, but that night, lying in my bed with blood still crusted in my hair, I realized I'd been a prisoner in my own family my entire life. The headache wouldn't stop. Every heartbeat sent a pulse of pain through my skull, radiating from where I'd hit the table. I should have gone to the emergency room right then, but something held me back. Maybe it was the same instinct that had kept me quiet for 36 years, the deeply ingrained belief that my pain wasn't important enough to make a fuss about. I grew up learning that lesson. My biological father left when I was 5 years old, and no one ever told me why. One day he was there, the next he was a ghost we weren't allowed to mention. Mom remarried Dan 2 years later. Dan was kind in his passive way, a man who had long ago learned that disagreeing with my mother meant enduring days of icy silence. I learned the same lesson early. In our family, keeping quiet meant keeping peace. Speaking up meant punishment. And then there was Lindsay. My younger sister, 18 months younger, though you'd think she was the firstborn, from how the family treated her, had always been the sun around which everyone orbited. Mom had financially supported her through 3 failed business ventures without a single word of criticism. Lindsay received praise for achievements that would have been ignored if I'd accomplished them. She was defended no matter what she did, believed, no matter what she said. I watched my mother's eyes light up whenever Lindsay walked into a room. I watched those same eyes dim slightly when I entered. This had been true for as long as I could remember. I'd stopped questioning it decades ago. Some children are simply loved more. I told myself that was just how families worked. As I lay there in the dark, my thoughts drifted to Aunt Patricia, Mom's younger sister. She'd been at the restaurant tonight, sitting in the corner as she always did at family gatherings. Quiet, watchful, somehow smaller than everyone else in the room, as if she was perpetually apologizing for taking up space. I'd always felt a strange kinship with my aunt, though we rarely exchanged more than polite greetings. We were both women who had learned to make ourselves invisible in this family. I remembered her face tonight, when I fell white as paper, her hands gripping the tablecloth, her eyes wide with something that looked almost like recognition. My mind wandered further to Grandma Eleanor, the only person who had ever loved me without conditions or comparisons. She passed 3 years ago, leaving me a small wooden box with a handwritten card. "Only open when you truly need to, my sweet girl. You'll know when." I'd never opened it, assuming it contained old jewelry or photographs. The box sat in my closet gathering dust. But tonight I remembered something else. At Grandma's funeral, I'd seen Lindsay arguing with Grandma's lawyer in the hallway. Her face was red with fury. When she noticed me watching, she'd immediately smiled and said she was just asking about the memorial service. I believed her then. I always believed Lindsay. Strange memories began surfacing as the pain pulsed through my head. The staircase fall 3 years ago, right after the funeral. The parking lot incident. The barbecue where I'd tripped. In each memory, Lindsay was there, nearby, watching. Always the first to say, "Kelly's always been so clumsy." My eyes found Grandma's box on my shelf. Something felt terribly wrong, not just in my body, but in the pattern of my entire life. I needed to get to the ER in the morning. But as I stared at that box, a question I'd never allowed myself to ask finally broke through. Had Grandma known something I didn't? The next morning, I could barely see straight. The headache had evolved into something monstrous overnight, and my vision kept doubling at the edges. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I drove myself to the emergency room, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, pulling over twice when the world started spinning too fast. The ER was busy for a Tuesday morning, but they took me back quickly once I mentioned hitting my head. A nurse checked my vitals while asking routine questions. When did the injury occur? How did it happen? Was I experiencing nausea, confusion, sensitivity to light? Yes to all three. She made notes on her tablet and told me the doctor would be in shortly. Dr. Matthews was a tall man in his 60s with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He examined the wound on the back of my head, asking me to follow his finger with my eyes and squeeze his hands. Then he ordered x-rays and a CT scan just to be safe. I lay still in the cold imaging room, listening to the machine hum around me, wondering how I was going to explain the medical bills to myself. I had insurance, but the deductible was high. I could almost hear Lindsay's voice in my head telling me I was overreacting, that I should have just taken some aspirin and slept it off. When Dr. Matthews came back into my examination room, something had changed. His expression, which had been professionally pleasant before, was now serious, concerned in a way that made my stomach tighten. He pulled up images on the computer screen and turned it so I could see. Ms. Hughes, you have a hairline fracture to your skull from the impact last night. It's painful, but it should heal fine with rest and monitoring. However, that's not what concerns me. He pointed to a different image, one showing my rib cage. This is from your chest x-ray. You see this area here. His finger traced a line along one of my ribs. This is an old fracture. It healed improperly without medical treatment. Based on the calcification, I'd estimate this injury is approximately 3 years old. 3 years ago. The staircase fall right after Grandma's funeral. I remembered the weeks of pain that followed, how it hurt to breathe deeply, or laugh, or even roll over in bed. Lindsay had been so attentive during that time. She'd brought me ice packs and heating pads, insisted on making me soup, told me I just needed rest. It's just a bad bruise, she'd said. You don't need to waste money on a doctor visit. You know how you always overreact to everything. I had believed her. I had always believed her. Ms. Hughes. Dr. Matthews was watching me carefully. Did you know you had a broken rib? No, I whispered. I thought it was just bruised. Who told you that? The question hung in the air. I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it again. Dr. Matthews sat down in the chair across from me, his voice gentle but firm. I've been practicing medicine for over 30 years. I've learned to recognize certain patterns. The combination of injuries I'm seeing here, your current skull fracture, this old, untreated rib fracture, and frankly, your hesitation to answer my questions raises concerns I'm obligated to address. He paused. Under state law, when medical professionals observe injury patterns consistent with ongoing abuse, we're required to report it to the authorities. This isn't about accusing anyone. It's about ensuring your safety and documenting evidence. The word abuse hit me like a physical blow. That's not what this is, I said automatically. My sister and I, it was an accident. She was joking around and I fell. And the rib fracture 3 years ago, I fell downstairs. Was anyone with you when you fell? Lindsay had been right behind me. She'd been the one to help me up, to tell me I needed to be more careful, to suggest I not mention it to anyone because people would think I was clumsy. I said nothing. Dr. Matthews nodded slowly as if my silence was answer enough. I've already made the call, Ms. Hughes. A detective will be here shortly. I want you to know that you're safe here, and whatever you choose to tell them is your decision. Detective Morrison arrived within the hour. She was a calm woman who looked to be in her early 50s, with short gray hair and steady brown eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. She pulled a chair close to my bed and introduced herself, then took out a small notebook. Her questions were careful and specific. Who was present at the birthday dinner? Who suggested having cake at that particular moment? Who poured my wine? Who was present when I fell down the stairs 3 years ago? Who discouraged me from seeing a doctor afterward? Who was the first to suggest I was overreacting? Each answer pointed to the same person. Lindsay poured my wine. Lindsay insisted on the cake ceremony. Lindsay was behind me on the stairs. Lindsay brought me ice packs instead of driving me to urgent care. Lindsay told me I was being dramatic. But that couldn't be right. Lindsay was difficult, yes. Competitive. sometimes cruel in the way siblings could be cruel. But she wouldn't actually hurt me on purpose. She was my sister. Sisters didn't do that to each other, did they? I was still trying to process what was happening when the door to my room burst open. Mom came in first, her face tight with barely controlled fury. Dan followed behind her, looking uncomfortable and out of place. And then Lindsay, her eyes red-rimmed mascara running down her cheeks in perfect streaks of distress. "Oh my God, Kelly!" Lindsay cried, rushing toward my bed. "I've been so worried about you. I can't believe this is happening. I never meant to hurt you. It was just a joke, you know that, right? We've always played rough. Remember when we were kids?" Before I could respond, Mom stepped forward, positioning herself between me and Detective Morrison. "I don't know what my daughter has told you," she said coldly, "but this is a family matter. Kelly has always been prone to dramatics. She's been jealous of her sister since they were children. Whatever she's claiming happened, I can assure you it was an accident." "Mom," I started, but she cut me off. "Tell them, Kelly. Tell them right now that this was an accident and that you want to drop whatever ridiculous complaint you've made." "Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family? To your sister's reputation, Lindsay has a business to run. She has a life, and you're trying to destroy it because you fell down and bumped your head." Dan stood behind them both, his discomfort visible in every line of his body, but his mouth stayed firmly closed. He'd learned long ago not to contradict my mother. We all had. The pattern of 36 years played out in that sterile hospital room. Kelly is wrong. Kelly is dramatic. Kelly is jealous. Lindsay is innocent. And anyone who questions this narrative is the enemy. I watched Detective Morrison's eyes move between my mother, my sister, and me. She was taking mental notes. I could see it. Then a quiet voice cut through the chaos. "Stop." Everyone turned. Aunt Patricia had risen from the chair in the corner, a chair I hadn't even noticed she was sitting in. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set with a determination I had never seen before. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "I've been quiet for 30 years. I watched and said nothing because I was afraid. Afraid of my own sister, afraid of being cut off from the only family I have. But I can't do it anymore. Not after last night. Not after seeing Kelly on that floor with blood on her face while everyone laughed. Patricia," my mother warned, her voice like ice. "Don't you dare." But Patricia wasn't looking at her sister. She was looking directly at Detective Morrison. "I have information relevant to this case. Things I've witnessed over the years. Things I should have reported a long time ago." Then she turned to me, tears streaming down her lined face. "Your grandmother left you something important, Kelly. A box. You need to open it tonight." Eleanor knew. She saw what I saw, and she spent her last years gathering evidence because she knew no one would believe her. Patricia gripped my hand, her voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. "What happened at your birthday wasn't an accident. It wasn't even the first time, and it won't be the last unless you stop it now. Open the box, Kelly. They'll have to believe documents. They'll have to believe proof." Patricia drove me home from the hospital that evening. The doctors had discharged me with instructions for concussion care, a prescription for pain medication, and strict orders to rest. But rest was the furthest thing from my mind. Patricia's words echoed in my head the entire drive. Open the box. They'll have to believe documents. They'll have to believe proof. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my front door. Patricia followed me inside her presence, a strange comfort. We had barely spoken more than pleasantries for 30 years. Yet here she was, the only family member who had ever stood up for me. I led her to my bedroom closet where Grandma's box sat on the top shelf, exactly where I had placed it 3 years ago. The wood was dusty, the small brass latch tarnished with age. I carried it to my kitchen table and sat down, Patricia taking the chair across from me. "Whatever is in there," Patricia said quietly, "Eleanor wanted you to have it. She spent the last years of her life making sure you would be protected." I lifted the lid with trembling fingers. Inside, I found 3 items that would reshape everything I thought I understood about my family and my life. The first was a legal document, several pages thick with an official seal and notarized signatures. I read the heading 3 times before the words made sense. Transfer on death deed, dated 5 years ago. The document showed that Grandma had legally transferred her beautiful Victorian house, the one I had loved visiting as a child, the one filled with memories of cookies baking and stories being read to me. The transfer was already complete. It had happened automatically when Grandma passed away. No probate needed. No court involvement required. I had legally owned that house for 3 years without knowing it. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Patricia's face was pale. "Keep looking." The second item was an old photograph faded with age. I recognized Grandma immediately, younger than I remembered her, holding a small child tightly against her chest. The child was me, maybe 3 years old, with curly hair and an uncertain expression. Grandma's arms were wrapped around me protectively, almost defensively. Behind us, barely visible at the edge of the frame, stood another child. Lindsay, perhaps 2 years old. I brought the photograph closer to my eyes, studying my sister's face. The expression there made my blood run cold. It wasn't sibling jealousy. It wasn't a toddler's pout. It was something darker. Something that didn't belong on any child's face. Pure, focused hatred. The third item was a letter written in Grandma's careful handwriting. I recognized the loops and curves from birthday cards and Christmas notes. My throat tightened as I began to read. "My sweet Kelly. If you're reading this, you finally needed to know. I've watched my daughter, your mother, fail you for 30 years. I've watched your sister hurt you while everyone looked away. I tried to tell your mother the truth many times. She refused to listen. She called me senile, dramatic, cruel. So I stopped speaking and started documenting. I can't change your mother. I can't fix your sister. But I can give you something no one can take away this house and the truth. The house is already legally yours. It transferred to you automatically when I passed. But be very careful, Kelly. Lindsay knows about this. She found out when I was dying, and she was furious. I saw something in her eyes that day that frightened me. Watch your back, my darling. And know that I always saw you. I always loved you, even when no one else did." I set the letter down, my vision blurring with tears. Patricia reached across the table and took my hand. "There's more you need to know, Shai," she said. "Things I witnessed, but was too afraid to tell you." Patricia explained what had happened 3 years ago when Grandma was in hospice care. Lindsay had discovered the transfer on death deed while going through Grandma's papers supposedly to help organize her affairs. She was furious when she realized she wouldn't inherit the house she had always assumed would be hers. Lindsay confronted Grandma, demanding she change the document. Patricia had been in the next room and heard everything. Eleanor refused. Patricia said, her voice barely above a whisper. She told Lindsay that she'd made her decision years ago and nothing would change it. She said she knew exactly what kind of person Lindsay was, even if no one else would admit it. Lindsay stormed out. I'd never seen her so angry. And after Grandma's funeral, Patricia overheard Lindsay on a phone call. She was speaking to someone, a lawyer, probably asking about ways to contest a transfer on death deed. "She said something I'll never forget," Patricia continued. She said, "There has to be a way to prove the old woman wasn't competent, or that Kelly manipulated her, and if all else fails, accidents happen. People become incapacitated. Someone has to manage their affairs." The staircase fall. 10 days after the funeral, the weeks of chest pain that Lindsay convinced me was just a bruise. "I wanted to warn you," Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. "But your mother has controlled and belittled me our entire lives. I was conditioned since childhood to stay quiet, to not make waves, to survive by becoming invisible. I'm so sorry, Kelly. I should have been braver. I should have protected you." I sat with this information for a long moment, feeling something shift inside me. The passive, quiet Kelly who accepted blame and minimized her own pain was fading. In her place, something stronger was emerging. I was done being a victim. I was done waiting for others to save me. The next morning, I contacted an estate lawyer who confirmed what the documents showed. The transfer on death deed was legally ironclad. The house had been mine since Grandma's death, and there was virtually no way to contest it at this point. Then I called Detective Morrison directly. "I have new information," I told her, "and I want to help build this case." I told her everything: the inheritance, Lindsay discovering it 3 years ago, the timing of my accidents coinciding with moments when I might have learned about or visited the property. Detective Morrison listened without interrupting. We've already subpoenaed the restaurant's security footage, she said. Would you be willing to come to the station and view it with us? Victims sometimes notice details that investigators miss. I agreed immediately. An hour later, I sat in a small room at the police station, watching footage from the restaurant's security cameras. What I saw made me physically ill. The video showed Lindsay at the bar before dinner ordering drinks. It showed her glancing around to make sure no one was watching, then slipping something from her purse into one glass. My glass, before carrying the drinks to the table. It showed her watching me throughout dinner, waiting as I became increasingly disoriented. It showed the cake incident from an angle the family hadn't seen. Lindsay's deliberate grip, the calculated aim, the force that was nothing like a playful prank. And after I hit the ground and lay motionless, it showed Lindsay bending down as if to check on me, then a small, satisfied smile crossing her face before she rearranged her features into panic. But the most damning evidence came from Lindsay's phone obtained through a warrant. Forensic analysis recovered deleted files and search history spanning 3 years. How to contest transfer on death deed. Proving undue influence on elderly relatives. Signs of mental incapacity in adults. How to become legal guardian of adult sibling. Sedatives that are hard to detect. Most disturbing was a recovered notes file containing a timeline of every accident I'd experienced with dates, methods, and outcomes. Lindsay had titled it simply K. Detective Morrison set down her tablet and looked at me. There's something else. The notes file has a section labeled Future. It contains 3 more planned incidents, each more severe than the last. Your birthday dinner was just phase 1. Phase 2 was scheduled for next month. She paused. The goal wasn't to kill you, Ms. Hughes. It was to incapacitate you enough to require a legal guardian. She was going to take everything from you by making sure you couldn't manage it yourself. The weight of Detective Morrison's words hung in the air between us. 3 more planned incidents. Phase 2 scheduled for next month. My own sister had been plotting to destroy my life piece by piece, and if that birthday dinner had gone according to her plan, I might never have discovered the truth until it was too late. Over the next week, the investigation revealed the full architecture of Lindsay's 3-year campaign against me. Detective Morrison walked me through the timeline they had constructed from the evidence. The staircase accident 3 years ago happened exactly 10 days after Grandma's funeral. The same week I received notification of the deed transfer from the estate lawyer. I had been too overwhelmed with grief and work to fully process what that document meant. I had set it aside, planning to deal with it later. Lindsay, however, understood immediately what she had lost, and she acted fast. The parking lot incident a year later happened the same week. I casually mentioned to Mom that I wanted to visit Grandma's old house to sort through some memories. Each accident was strategic, designed to build a narrative. Kelly is clumsy. Kelly doesn't take care of herself. Kelly can't be trusted to manage property. The sedative in my drink at the birthday dinner was a prescription medication. Investigators discovered that Lindsay had been doctor shopping for months, visiting different clinics with vague complaints about anxiety and insomnia, accumulating enough pills to use without raising red flags. The goal was never simply to hurt me. It was to hurt me just enough to require a guardian, and Lindsay had already researched how to position herself for that role through our mother. Detective Morrison and the prosecutor requested a meeting with my mother not as a suspect, but as a witness who might have relevant information. I insisted on being present. What emerged in that small conference room was more devastating than anything I had imagined. At first, Mom did what she always did. She defended Lindsay. She minimized. She deflected. But the prosecutor was patient and methodical, laying out evidence after evidence until there was nowhere left to hide. The video of Lindsay drugging my drink, the recovered notes file with its chilling timeline, the search history spanning 3 years, the medical records showing my pattern of untreated injuries, and then something in my mother broke. I knew something was wrong with Lindsay since she was a toddler. Her voice was hollow, emptied of all its usual certainty. There were incidents: a neighbor's cat that disappeared, a classmate who had an accident on the playground, a cousin who stopped coming to family gatherings after being alone with Lindsay for 5 minutes. She stared at her hands as she spoke. Each time I made excuses, I told myself all children go through phases. I paid vet bills quietly. I convinced other mothers not to make reports. I moved Lindsay to different schools when questions got too uncomfortable. I erased every trace of what she did because I couldn't face what it meant about my own child. She looked at me, then her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. And I punished you for it. I know I did. I told myself that if I just loved Lindsay more, gave her more attention, more praise, more protection, she'd become normal. I thought you were strong, Kelly. You were always so independent, so quiet. I told myself you didn't need me the way she did. I sacrificed you trying to save her. A long pause filled the room. And I failed both of you. I created a monster because I was too afraid to see one. I had waited 36 years to hear my mother acknowledge what she had done to me. Now that the words were finally spoken, I felt nothing but exhaustion. There would be time later to process what this confession meant, whether it changed anything, whether forgiveness was even possible. But not now. Now there was still work to do. I cooperated with police to coordinate Lindsay's arrest at a family gathering. Sunday dinner at Mom's house. Maximum witnesses. Maximum impact. Maximum accountability. I wanted everyone who had ever watched Lindsay hurt me and said nothing to see her face consequences. When Detective Morrison arrived with 2 uniformed officers, Lindsay was in the middle of telling a story about a coworker who had annoyed her. She looked up with confusion that quickly shifted to alarm. Her mask flickered, and she tried her usual tactics. The tears came immediately, the trembling voice, the wide, innocent eyes. "I don't understand what's happening," she said, her voice breaking. "Kelly, tell them, this is a misunderstanding. We're sisters. Whatever I did, I'm sorry. We can work this out as a family." But this time there was no one to believe her. Mom sat frozen at the head of the table, her face gray. Dan stared at his plate. The aunts and uncles who had come for dinner watched in stunned silence. Detective Morrison read the charges. Assault in the 2nd degree, elevated from simple assault due to premeditation. Felony poisoning. Criminal harassment pattern. As the handcuffs closed around Lindsay's wrists, her performance collapsed entirely. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. "This is your fault," she screamed at me, 34 years of jealousy pouring out in a torrent. "Everything is always your fault. That house should have been mine. I was the one who visited Grandma. I was the one who was there. You just sat in your corner being pathetic and quiet, and you got everything. I've been cleaning up your existence since we were kids. You're the reason Dad left you, ruined this family by being born." Detective Morrison made a note. Lindsay's spontaneous statements captured on body camera would be admissible evidence of motive and mental state. The golden child's own words would help convict her. Later that evening, Patricia came to my house. With Lindsay arrested and the truth finally exposed, my aunt was ready to share everything she had kept hidden for 3 decades. "There's something else I never told anyone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you were 6 years old, I was visiting for Thanksgiving. You and Lindsay were playing upstairs. I came up to call you both for dinner and saw something through the doorway." Patricia's hands shook as she spoke. "Lindsay had led you to the top of the basement stairs. She looked around carefully to make sure no adults were watching. Then she put both hands on your back and pushed with all her strength." My broken arm. I still remembered the cast, the itching, the weeks of not being able to write at school. "You fell all the way down?" Patricia continued, tears streaming down her face. I screamed. When the adults came running, Lindsay was already crying, saying you tripped, saying she tried to catch you. I told your mother exactly what I saw. She said I was imagining things. She said I was jealous of her family because I didn't have one of my own. She told me if I ever repeated that lie, I'd never see any of you again. Patricia wiped her eyes. So I stayed quiet. For 30 years, I watched Lindsay hurt you in small ways and large ways, and I said nothing because I was afraid of my own sister. I lied to myself so I could live with my cowardice. Kelly, I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. After Patricia left, I drove to Grandma's house. My house now. I walked through the empty rooms in the darkness, touching the walls that Grandma had touched sitting in the chair where she used to read to me. While cleaning out her old writing desk, I found a hidden compartment behind a drawer. Inside was one final envelope, yellowed with age and sealed with wax. It was addressed to my mother in Grandma's handwriting. The postmark was from 31 years ago. It had never been opened. Stamped across the front in faded red ink were the words, "Return to sender. Refused." I held the envelope up to the light. Through the thin paper, I could read the first line of the letter inside. I need to tell you what really happened the day Michael left and why he was actually running from Lindsay, not Kelly. My hands trembled as I carefully broke the old wax seal and unfolded the yellowed pages inside. Grandma's handwriting filled 3 pages. I read her words slowly, each sentence landing like a stone in still water. My dear daughter, I'm writing this because you won't let me speak. Every time I try to tell you what really happened, you hang up or walk away, so I'm putting it in writing. I know you've spent years blaming Kelly for driving Michael away. I've heard you say that everything was fine until Kelly came along, that she was a difficult baby who drove your husband to leave. I've watched you punish that innocent child for a crime she didn't commit. Here is the truth: Michael left because of Lindsay. When Kelly was 6 months old, Michael came home early and went upstairs to check on the children. He found Lindsay, barely 2 years old, standing in Kelly's crib. She had a pillow pressed against Kelly's face. The baby was turning blue. Michael pulled Lindsay away just in time. He told you that night. He begged you to get Lindsay evaluated. You said he was being ridiculous, that toddlers don't understand what they're doing. For the next 4 years, Michael watched and worried. He pleaded with you to get help. You refused. When Kelly was 5, Michael finally couldn't take it anymore. He told me I can't save Kelly if her own mother won't see the danger. He was a coward for leaving. But Lindsay was the reason he ran. Not Kelly. Never Kelly. You've punished the wrong daughter for 31 years. I read the letter 3 times. Then I drove to my mother's house and placed it on the kitchen table without a word. Mom picked it up. I watched her face cycle through denial, recognition, and finally, devastating acceptance. When she finished, she looked like she had aged a decade in minutes. I remember this letter, she whispered. I remember refusing it. I told myself Mother was trying to destroy my family out of spite. She looked up at me with hollow eyes. I blamed you. Every day I blamed you for your father leaving. I made you invisible because looking at you reminded me of him walking out. And the whole time, she couldn't finish. I didn't help her. You had 31 years to open that letter, I said. You chose the lie because the lie was easier, and I paid for it every single day of my life. Mom asked what she could do to make it right. My answer was firm. You can't make it right. 31 years of damage doesn't get erased by one apology, but if you genuinely want to change, start with therapy. Real therapy alone for at least a year. Work on understanding how you used me as a scapegoat, how you enabled a predator because you couldn't face the truth. She nodded, tears streaming. Don't contact me until your therapist says you've made genuine progress. And even then, I might not be ready. I get to decide the timeline now. I stood to leave. I'm choosing not to carry your guilt for you. 2 months after her arrest, Lindsay's case concluded. Her defense attorney tried to negotiate a minimal sentence, arguing first-time offender status, but the premeditation documented in her own notes, combined with the video evidence and the pattern of abuse, made leniency impossible. The judge sentenced her to 4 years probation, 9 months of home confinement with electronic monitoring, mandatory psychiatric treatment for 2 years, complete restitution of my medical expenses, and a 10-year restraining order. She could not contact me, come within 1,000 feet of me, or approach Grandma's house. The judge's closing statement was pointed. Ms. Hughes, the evidence reveals calculated predatory behavior toward your sister spanning years. The only reason you are not facing prison is the absence of permanent physical injury. The psychiatric evaluation is not optional. Comply fully or serve the remainder incarcerated. The social fallout was equally devastating. Lindsay's employer terminated her when the arrest became public. Her friends disappeared when details of the K file leaked. She was forced to move back in with our parents, who now looked at her with fear instead of pride. The house she schemed for 3 years to steal was legally protected from her forever. 14 months after the birthday that changed everything, I stood in the renovated front room of Grandma Eleanor's Victorian house. The wallpaper was fresh. The floors were refinished. The rooms that once held one woman's love now held space for many. The sign outside read Patricia's House, a resource center for survivors of family abuse. Named for the aunt who finally found courage to speak truth. Patricia volunteered here twice a week, helping other women find their voices. She was in therapy herself, now working through decades of being silenced. Helping others speak up had become part of her own healing. Women came to Patricia's house to find safety, legal resources, and something I never had until recently, someone who believes them, someone who understands that family can be the most dangerous place of all. 16 months after that birthday, a car pulled up outside. I watched from the window as my mother stepped out carrying a cardboard box. She walked slowly up the path and rang the bell. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "I've been in therapy for 14 months, she said. Her voice was different now, quieter. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. My therapist helped me understand that forgiveness is your choice, not something I'm entitled to." She held out the box. "I found more of your grandmother's things. Photo albums, her journals. I thought you should have them." I accepted the box. We stood in silence as she looked past me at the women moving through the house, finding safety, finding voices they thought they'd lost. "Your grandmother would be so proud of what you've built here," she said quietly. She would. We didn't embrace, we didn't cry together, but she said, "I'm going to keep going to therapy, for as long as it takes, even if you never want a relationship with me again." And I said, "Good. That's the right reason to do it." For 36 years, I believed I was the problem. The clumsy one, the dramatic one, the daughter who made dad leave and made mom love my sister more. It took a cake smashed into my face and an X-ray of old broken bones to finally see the truth. I was never the problem. I was the target. The moment I stopped accepting that role was the moment I finally started to live. Some people think revenge means making your enemies suffer, but the best revenge is building something they can never destroy, something that turns your pain into power. That's Grandma's real legacy, and now it's mine too. Thank you for staying with Kelly's story until the end. This is more than just a tale of revenge or family drama. It's a reminder that the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally can sometimes be the ones who hurt us the most deeply. If there's one lesson from Kelly's journey, it's this: your pain is valid and your voice matters. Too many of us were raised to keep quiet, to not make waves, to protect family reputation at the cost of our own well-being. We were taught that being a good daughter or a good sister means accepting mistreatment with a smile. That is a lie. Setting boundaries is not betrayal. Speaking up is not drama. Protecting yourself is not selfishness. It is survival. If you recognize yourself in Kelly's story, if you've ever been the scapegoat, the invisible one, the family member whose feelings were always dismissed, please know that you are not alone, and it is never too late to choose yourself. Whether you're 36 or 66, you deserve to be seen, believed, and treated with respect. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone you know, please share it. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss stories like this one, and leave a comment below telling us what you think. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who hurt you? Have you found the courage to speak your truth after years of silence? Your story might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear today. We read every single comment, and your voice matters here.